Hello, I'm Dr. Peter Carter, Director of the Climate Emergency Institute. I'm making another Climate Emergency Institute video today, another one on the most important report, in my view, ever. That's the IPCC AR6 Sixth Assessment Working Group 1, which is the science report released this month, August of 2021. Oh, I'm wearing my United Nations Climate Conference hat today. And this report is most important also with respect to the upcoming next climate conference under the UN, which is the COP26 to be held in Glasgow at the end of this year. There is a striking big difference in general in this IPCC report compared to previous ones. And the difference is that the IPCC is now definite on what has been and is happening recently with respect to the climate, what's the reason for these climate changes, impacts, and also on the projections in the future of these impacts of global climate change. So, for example, and quoting from the IPCC, it is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, making extreme climate events, including heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts, more frequent and severe. What a huge statement that is with respect to our future under continued global climate change, global climate disruption. Also, recent changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. The most important statement of this most important IPCC report is the following. Unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C will be beyond reach. And also notably in the press release and in the longer IPCC report, it was stated that 2 degrees C may also be beyond reach without these immediate, rapid global emissions decline. Now, there's nothing new about this. The IPCC has been saying this for many, many years. Climate change, then, is already affecting every region on Earth and in multiple ways. And these impacts, these changes we experience will increase with further warming. And there is no going back from some changes in the climate system. Some of these changes are now irreversible. To limit global warming, immediate, strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases are necessary. Now, this is also different because this is the first time actually that the IPCC has focused on methane emissions. And they're now saying that it's essential that methane emissions are also immediately slashed, as well as carbon dioxide. And there's a benefit here because this would not only reduce the consequences of climate change, but it would also improve air quality. It would improve the air pollution, which is mainly due to fossil fuel combustion, fossil fuel air pollution emissions. Human influence has warmed the climate at a rate that is unprecedented in at least 2,000 years. Now, the rate of global warming and climate change is every bit as important as the degree, particularly from the point of view of whether it will be possible to adapt to these changes. The faster the rate, the more impossible it is to adapt to climate change impacts. And as the global temperature increase graph in this report shows, global warming global surface temperature increase is accelerating, and it's accelerating over just recent years. Climate change, then, is already affecting every inhabited region across the globe, with human influence, our industrial emissions, contributing to many observed changes in weather and climate extremes. Now, extreme weather events is treated as one broad category of impacts, as one impact, by the IPCC. Extreme weather events are painfully obvious over recent years, particularly this year, 2021. So these extreme weather events are extreme heat, heat waves, drought, also heavy precipitation to the other extreme as a result of global heating. Wildfires are included by the IPCC under extreme weather events. Extreme storms, superstorms, heavy precipitation coming in deluges, and floods. And I think we're all aware that we have experienced all of these on every continent already. A big change, a big improvement as a science is that the IPCC is now able to tell us which particular regions are being impacted by extreme weather events, and that increase due to our greenhouse gas emissions. And this continues with the projections on which regions will be impacted. So in the case of extreme heat, every continent and almost every region has already been impacted by increasing extreme heat events. With extreme precipitation increase, again, this has already impacted every continent, not as widespread with the regions as extreme heat. And the region, the very large region, which is being impacted the worst with respect to the overall regions that are being impacted by heavy precipitation, that is Asia. The other extreme to heavy precipitation is drought, and that's increasing, and that has increased on every continent. Again, not as widespread as the heating, and the continent which is affected most adversely, most widely by drought is Africa. Western United States is being impacted by drought. East and South America is being impacted. Western and Southern Europe, Eastern Asia, as I said, many regions in Africa, making up a huge African region, being impacted by increased drought. And the other region is Southern Australia. So future emissions cause future additional warming, and the total warming is dominated by carbon dioxide emissions. So the biggest contributor to global surface warming and these extremes, therefore, is CO2 emissions. But in order to avoid catastrophic climate change and stabilize the temperature, all of these emissions, all of the greenhouse gases must be addressed. As we've already seen, CO2 and methane specifically must be put into decline immediately. And all three of the main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, must be reduced to near zero. That was stated, and that's a direct quote, from the 2014 assessment of the fifth IPCC assessment. Nitrous oxide is the greenhouse gas which is contributing the least of the three to global surface warming and climate disruption and these increased extreme weather events. But as I say, they all have to be brought down to near zero to stabilize. So we have another big definite quote: with every increment of global warming, changes get larger in regional temperature, precipitation, and soil moisture. In the case of soil moisture, we have the two extremes, which I've already noted. We have drying and drought, and then we have extreme precipitation. and damage to the land surface. Extreme heat and drought can damage the land surface by increasing soil erosion, which is already a problem. But also extreme precipitation, and particularly flooding, can make soil erosion worse. So both extremes of precipitation will aggravate a problem which we already have in agriculture, which is soil erosion. This working group 1 shows what we have known for a very long time. It shows it definitely. That is the global mean temperature. And already we're seeing, as is in this report, that the Northern Hemisphere has all the best food producing regions in the world. The Northern Hemisphere is warming, is being heated up faster than the Southern Hemisphere. And the Arctic very, very much is being heated up the fastest of all regions on the planet. Those differences become more pronounced with 1.5 degrees C of warming and even more at 2 degrees C of warming. So drying and drought then is a extreme weather event which has been increasing in certain regions and of course which is critical for agriculture. Most importantly, at 1.5 degrees C of global warming, 1.5 degrees C is really unavoidable now. We're at 1.2 degrees C already. So at 1.5 degrees C of warming, all of North America, all of the North American agricultural regions are impacted by soil drying, a decrease in soil moisture. That applies to the United States and even up to Canada. Drying, a decrease in soil moisture, affects a huge region of South America. More than half of South America is going to be impacted with drying and drought at 1.5 degrees C. That includes agricultural regions in Argentina and Brazil, and it also includes the Amazon, which of course is extremely damaging to the Amazon rainforest. The other region which is shown in these IPCC Working Group 1 projections is Chile, and Chile is in a mega drought, a drought which will go on and on and on. And when we look again at the United States, southwest United States, according to the research, and this is reflected in the projections here by the Working Group 1 report, is going into mega drought. There are regions which will be impacted by increased precipitation, Central African regions, some regions of Asia, and India is projected to be impacted by increased precipitation. Some regions, and this is another first in this report, some regions are projected to experience compound weather events. So in close proximity, it's predicted that, projected by the models, that it's possible for extreme heat and drought, of course, to coexist, but also extreme heat, drought, and heavy precipitation to closely coexist in one region, and therefore extremely, extremely damaging for such regions when this occurs. In the Northern Hemisphere, Western Europe and Southern Europe are projected to be affected by increased drought at 1.5 degrees C. A very large region of Southern Africa, South Africa, and also countries neighboring to the north, east, and west of South Africa are going to be affected by decreased soil moisture, drought at 1.5 degrees C. China, both northern and southern China, affected by increased drying, drought vulnerability at 1.5 degrees C. And in Australia, which is getting drought very, very frequently, what's important there is that the soil moisture drying shows up exactly, precisely where Australia has its agriculture, which is the southeast and the southwest tip of the Australian continent. This IPCC shows a projection of these extreme weather events by several different approaches of the climate change science, making it even more certain and clearer to us reading the report. Another way that it does this is to project 1 in 10 extreme events. Those are extreme weather events that normally, pre-industrially, before all of the industrial greenhouse gas emissions, would occur just once in 10 years. And in the case of extreme heat, it projects this at 1 in 50 years. In precipitation, 1 in 10 years is the model projection again, and for drought, 1 in 10 years again. And it dramatically shows that these extreme weather events increase in frequency and at the same time increase in intensity. This applies to extreme heat, extreme precipitation, and drought. And the frequency is increased by very, very large degrees. So the frequency is doubled, tripled, and then way more than quadrupled with the present situation and with 1.5 degrees C and 2 degrees C. So these extreme weather events will increase greatly and relatively more so with each increment, as already been stated, of global warming. This will be very, very damaging to populations, but also, most important, be very, very damaging to their agriculture. And this includes our agriculture, as we've already seen in the Northern Hemisphere, which is the best agriculture in the world. A big, big important finding in this Working Group 1 report is that what is called the carbon sink of the land and ocean will, over the course of this century, will decline in efficiency. So what the carbon sink means is that as CO2 emissions accumulate increasingly into the atmosphere, in the case of forests, there's a fertilization effect, and the forests have been greening up. The CO2 is dissolved in the oceans, but that causes ocean acidification. So the way this has been looked at over the years, because we've known about this for many, many years, is that these so-called sinks, and they're really actually temporary storages, increase as atmospheric CO2 increases. And this is expressed in this report as cumulative CO2 emissions. But over the course of time and over these increasing scenarios, although more CO2 is taken up by the sinks become progressively less efficient, and so at the same time, more CO2 is left in the atmosphere. With higher temperature increase scenarios by 2100, this is not a linearly changing situation. The increase in CO2 left in the atmosphere, the amount gets larger and larger and larger relatively with each increasing emissions and global warming scenario. The report says that the land carbon sinks, which is the forests, that will start failing the first, and the projection is that it will start failing soon, later, and the timing is indefinite, but it will be this century. Later, even the ocean carbon sink will decline in its efficiency. So this is now a further result of global surface warming and ocean warming, this is yet another impact which will further accelerate the rate of already accelerating global warming. So the projections of the what are called the climate indicators, and I'm going to give you the results from the worst case and the best case. Temperature change, global surface temperature increase is already accelerating, and with the highest scenario, which is 8.5, it continues to accelerate faster and faster. We are on the worst case scenario, RCP 8.5, or this one, SSP 8.5. We are on this worst case scenario, and this is a very important scientific paper published recently. And the name of the paper was that RCP 8.5 tracks cumulative CO2 emissions. When we look at the global surface temperature increase of the best case scenario, even in the best case scenario, the temperature increase continues for some decades, certainly up to 2040, and doesn't really plateau out until 2050. Even if our governments do what they have to do, which they can easily do, which is to put global emissions into decline immediately, and this is where the UN climate conference COP26 comes in crucially, because there is no progress this year even on the discussions that the countries have been having towards COP26. There's no indication whatsoever that the countries will reach an agreement to put global emissions into immediate rapid decline or into decline anytime soon. Arctic summer sea ice projection. The Arctic summer sea ice from 1950 to about 2070 actually was increasing, and then switched to a decrease, and a rapid decrease at that. The projections are that under the best case scenario, immediate emissions decline, sea ice will become practically free by 2050. But the range of sea ice change, as a result, of course, of global surface warming and Arctic amplified warming, shows that this could occur as early as 2030, and a recent paper has been published showing that the Arctic summer sea ice, that is September, which is the month of the maximum loss of Arctic sea ice area, this could occur by 2035. The loss of Arctic sea ice is an amplifying feedback. It's the reason why the Arctic has been warming at double the global average, is now warming at triple the global average. That is due to the feedback of less of the solar energy being reflected back out to space by the shiny albedo Arctic sea ice surface. And as the sea ice melts away, it exposes dark open ocean, and that is a very efficient absorber of heat. The loss of Arctic sea ice and the loss of the cooling effect, which scientists have described as the air conditioner, the progressive loss of Arctic sea ice and the increase of heat being absorbed by the Arctic, and the Arctic warming faster and faster and faster as a result, this inevitably is going to have large impacts on the northern hemisphere, and inevitably is going to have further large impacts, which we're already getting and which are projected to get worse, on the crucially important northern hemisphere agricultural regions. The next projection is in this report is ocean acidification. This is measured in what is called pH hydrogen ion. The relationship is inverse. As pH goes down, ocean acidification goes up. We see the same sort of thing as we've already seen with the other indicators. On the worst case scenario, which we're under already, ocean acidification is already accelerating, and this accelerating will just increase under the worst case scenario up to the end of the century. Under the best case scenario, ocean acidification also continues to increase and does not stabilize, level out until 2050 or 2060. So last on these climate indicators, these climate change indicators, we have ocean sea level rise. There are two reasons for sea level rise. One is simply the physics of warming up water. That water expands, so causes the sea levels to rise, and this has been going on for decades. The other reason is the melting of planetary land ice. The Arctic sea ice, which we've just been looking at, floats on top of the Arctic Ocean. So as it melts away, that doesn't affect the sea level rise. A global sea level rise is currently accelerating. Under the worst case scenario, which we're on, that acceleration will continue to increase. Under the best case scenario, sea level rise will continue to increase, albeit slower than the worst case scenario, but it will continue to increase, and not at a greatly slower rate than it's increasing at present. That increase won't really slow down until the end of the century, around 2070. So we are committed to a great deal of further continuing sea level rise. And it could be way worse, as is shown in the Working Group 1 report. And that is because of the massive quantities of ice in the ice sheets, in the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. And Working Group 1, this is another first time, there are many first times for this science report, indicates what it calls low likelihood, high impact situation, which includes ice sheet instability. The worst case scenario at present does not include ice sheet instability, but we've known for a long time that the Greenland ice sheet is subject to instability under global surface warming, and recent research indicates that this applies to the Antarctic ice sheets as well. So the Working Group 1 gives us a graph plot of sea level rise, which is way faster than under the worst case scenario. The last assessment, 2014, showed that the Greenland instability could occur at 1.5 degrees C, and 1.5 degrees C is already now completely unavoidable. It's unavoidable because governments have done nothing to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. They did nothing even after the 2018 1.5 degrees C report, which showed the climate emergency, as was rapidly and widely acknowledged following this 1.5 degree C report. So I want to finish up to put this in greater context, and crucially important context, which the IPCC doesn't report on, and that is the current policies, plans under world governments, under corporations, fossil fuel corporations, and under global investment bank corporations, which are financing the fossil fuel corporations to continue to extract more and more fossil fuels, which is even encouraged by the governments. All the governments are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and which are being continually permitted by governments around the world. This is worldwide. Some countries are better than others, but they're all doing this. So this is followed by a climate expert interactive website called Climate Action Tracker. Right now, under current climate policies, global temperature increase will continue to accelerate and is projected to reach about 3 degrees C. Now, 3 degrees C is absolutely a total catastrophic, an end-of-the-world situation with regards our civilization and the human race. And bear in mind that we're in the 6th mass extinction of species already, and so that will be a total catastrophic annihilation of species at 3 degrees C. Absolutely, absolutely unthinkable. But this is what governments are actually condemning us to with respect to policies for energy, which is all important. There are really no policies with respect to climate. Governments are continuing to fail to agree to really do anything on climate at all. They're continuing to subsidize them. But on energy policies, we are on the worst case scenario, and we will continue on that worst case scenario because governments pushing, permitting, and subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And as I say, all governments are doing this, some a lot worse, a lot bigger than others, that rather than cutting back on fossil fuel energy and getting that to be rapidly replaced, as of course we all know we can do with 100% clean, zero carbon combustion, renewable, which is everlasting energy, governments are doing just the opposite. And this is what I call a crime of all time. I co-authored a book, Unprecedented Crime, in 2018. And in the case of under the current situation, which is so bad as regards increasing extreme weather events, which are catastrophic to our civilization, to populations, as I say, to their agriculture, for governments to be continuing to push and subsidize the fossil fuel industry on any moral or ethical basis, this has to be called an unprecedented evil, worse than an unprecedented crime even, an unprecedented crime against all humanity. But this is now an evil without any past precedent whatsoever. It will wipe out life on Earth. We're already in this 6th mass extinction, which in the published science has been called a biological annihilation event. And so I hope I've shown that it is an absolute survival imperative. Governments, and this means the population, civil society, compelling governments to put global emissions into immediate, rapid, large-scale decline. They can, I've been saying for many years, governments can do this any year by simply correcting what the Stern report called the market failure, what Stern report in 2006, UK Stern report called the greatest and most far-reaching market failure ever. Just correcting the market failures by stopping all the subsidies and, on the other hand, charging the large central polluters of greenhouse gases, which of course is the fossil fuel industry, charging them the full cost of their pollution. That includes air, water, and greenhouse gas pollution. Simply doing that, which governments can do at virtually a stroke of a pen, simply doing that, the market, the so-called free market, which is driving, thanks to a government encouraging, driving us to global climate and planetary catastrophe, that sensitivity and the power of the market, which turns on a dime, will stop investments, literally stop investments into the fossil fuel industry. And all of those investments will go into the amazing, spectacular, wonderful actually, for our future, the zero combustion, renewable, clean, energy, which is everlasting energy. So we're still looking, as I've been saying for many years, at the best of all futures or the worst of all futures. Tragically, that's being decided on the side of the worst of possible futures. But it has always been the case that switching off the fossil fuel industry onto 100% renewable clean energy, which reduces in cost and gets better with the more we use, switching to that is a wonderful future, a future of golden age for humanity such as we've never seen. Tragically and criminally and morally the most evil, the governments and the corporations and the banks are doing exactly the opposite. They are, even as renewable energy rapidly increases, they are pushing fossil fuel energy. So fossil fuel energy production is still on an accelerating output situation. This applies now even to the situation where under COVID there was a pause in the world economy and emissions went down quickly, the largest amount of emissions reduction ever. This didn't change atmospheric CO2 whatsoever. Atmospheric CO2 continues to increase. All three atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations are increasing at an accelerating rate. And CO2 continued to accelerate, still on a record high, notwithstanding this sudden, pretty large decline in emissions. And that's because CO2 lasts so long in the atmosphere. It's highly persistent and highly cumulative. So without a huge, and we've known this since the very first IPCC assessment in 1990, without a huge, at that time it was put to an 80% reduction, and prolonged decrease in emissions, CO2 doesn't stop increasing. Bear in mind that if we push this report, then we can push our governments into putting, which has to happen according to this report and many previous, to put global emissions into immediate, rapid decline. So I hope I've reinforced that over and over. And so thank you for listening, and thanks to the IPCC is a most important and fine report on the science. Thank you.